In 1843, the Earl of Ashworth auctioned his 4 daughters at a house party in Derbyshire. He didn't call it that. He called it a winter gathering, a fortnight of festivities, a chance for eligible young ladies to make fine acquaintances. But the Duke of Ravenswood arrived with £40,000 of debt attached to his estate and a solicitor's letter in his breast pocket, and the Earl had 4 daughters and a house that was mortgaged to the eaves, and everyone in that dining room knew exactly what was happening. The question was, which daughter would be purchased? Nobody thought it would be Cecily. She was the 4th, the spare, the one the Earl had stopped mentioning in letters. The Duke arrived on a Tuesday in December, when the roads from Sheffield were frozen solid and the sky looked like the inside of a pewter bowl. His carriage came up the drive at 3:30 in the afternoon, and by 4:30 he was standing in the Ashworth drawing-room with mud on his boots and the expression of a man enduring a prolonged root canal, watching 4 young women perform accomplishments for his inspection. Cordelia, the eldest, played the pianoforte. She played it very well. Her fingers were precise and her posture was immaculate, and she had been rehearsing this particular piece since October, when the Duke's solicitor had first written to the Earl. Arabella, the 2nd, sang. She had a lovely voice and she knew it, and she used it the way a merchant uses a quality product, carefully, strategically, with an eye to the return. Josephine the 3rd painted a watercolor at a small easel in the corner. She was the prettiest of the 4, and she knew that too, and she angled herself toward the light with the unconscious precision of a woman who had been angling herself toward light since she was 16. The Duke watched all 3 of them with the attentive glazed expression of a man watching livestock at auction. He applauded at the appropriate moments. He said the appropriate things. He drank the Earl's brandy, which was good brandy, one of the few things the Earl had not yet sold. He did not notice the 4th daughter until he nearly stepped on her. She was under the writing table in the corner of the room, behind the heavy curtain that separated the drawing-room from the passage. She had her back against the wall and her knees drawn up, and she was reading. Not performing reading, actually reading, with a candle stub wedged between 2 books and her slippers off and her stockinged feet pressed flat against the cold wainscoting. She had a piece of shortbread in her hand. She was eating it without looking at it, turning pages with her other hand, and she did not look up when the Duke's boot appeared 6 inches from her knee. She looked up when he said quietly, "Is there room?" Cecily Ashworth looked at the Duke of Ravenswood for approximately 2 seconds. Then she looked at the curtain. Then she looked back at him. "It's 4 feet wide," she said. "You're very large." "I'll manage." He sat down on the floor of the passage, back against the wall, knees up like hers, and the curtain fell back into place and the sound of Cordelia's pianoforte became muffled and distant. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "You're supposed to be out there," Cecily said, "being charmed." "I know. Cordelia's piece is technically very accomplished." "I know that too." She offered him the shortbread without looking up from her book. He took it. "You're the 4th one," he said. "The spare." She turned a page. "You don't need to be polite about it. My father stopped including me in the letters after the 2nd response from your solicitor. I'm here because there wasn't a graceful way to exclude me from a house party held in my own house." The Duke looked at the side of her face. She had ink on her left thumb, and her hair was coming down on one side, and she was reading what appeared to be a treatise on agricultural drainage. "Agricultural drainage," he said. "Our western fields flood every spring, 300 acres of useless mud. I've been trying to work out if it's a tile drain problem or a gradient problem." She glanced at him. "It's a gradient problem. The previous Duke had the outflow ditch dug at the wrong angle. 30 years of flooding because someone couldn't be bothered to do the arithmetic." The Duke was quiet for a moment. "The previous Duke," he said, "was my father." Cecily Ashworth closed her book. She turned and looked at him fully for the first time. He looked back at her. He had dark eyes and a tired face, and mud on his boots that had not been there when he arrived, which meant he had walked the grounds before coming inside, which meant he had looked at the fields before he had looked at the daughters. "I apologize," she said. "That was accurate," he said. "Don't apologize for accuracy." Outside the curtain, Arabella began to sing. Cecily opened her book again. The Duke did not move. They sat on the floor of the passage in the cold and the candlelight, and the music came through the curtain like something from a different world, and neither of them went back to it. The morning after was a Tuesday of a different temperature. The house had warmed slightly, or perhaps it was only that the fires had been lit earlier, because the Ashworth housekeeper had decided that the Duke's presence warranted coal at 6 in the morning instead of 7. Cecily knew this because she was awake at 6, sitting at the small desk in her bedroom with the drainage treatise open and a letter half written to the land agent in Sheffield, and she heard the coal being shoveled into the grate across the hall and thought, one extra fire for the duration of his visit, and then back to 7 o'clock and the cold. She knew the arithmetic of this house the way she knew the arithmetic of her own body. The Earl's debts stood at £9,412 as of October. The mortgage on the house was held by a bank in London that had been patient for 3 years and was no longer patient. The western fields flooded, the roof over the east wing leaked. The carriage horses were 15 years old. There was no money for a new roof, no money for new horses, no money for the drainage work, and the Earl had 4 daughters and 1 son who was 12 and still at school and could not be sold, so the daughters were sold instead. One of them anyway, the one the Duke chose. Cecily had done the arithmetic on that too. Cordelia was the obvious choice. Accomplished, composed, the right age, the right manner. Arabella was the second choice. Josephine was the wild card, the prettiest one, the one that might tip a man toward impulse. Cecily was not a choice. Cecily was furniture. She finished the letter to the land agent, sealed it, and went down to breakfast. The Duke was already there. He was the only one there, sitting at the long table with a cup of coffee and a ledger open in front of him, and he had his coat off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he was doing arithmetic in the margins with a pencil stub. He looked up when she came in. He did not look surprised. "You're up early," she said. "I don't sleep well in houses I'm considering purchasing." She stopped. "Is that what this is? A purchase?" "Isn't it?" She sat down across from him and poured coffee from the pot on the sideboard. She looked at the ledger. He didn't close it. She looked at the numbers. She was good at reading numbers upside down. She had been doing it since she was 12, reading her father's correspondence over his shoulder when he thought she was behind him. "Those are your estate accounts," she said. "Yes." "Your tenants are 3/4 behind on rent." "Yes." "And your drainage problem is worse than ours." "Considerably." He turned the ledger to face her. "My father borrowed against the estate to fund a parliamentary campaign in 1831. The campaign failed. The debt compounded. I inherited the title and £40,000 of obligation in 1838, and I have been attempting to bail water ever since." She looked at the numbers. She looked at him. "How much does a wife solve?" "A wife with a sufficient dowry solves approximately 30,000 of it, which leaves 10,000 and a decade of careful management. My father's dowry is 4,000. I know." She set down her coffee cup. "Then why are you here?" He looked at her for a moment. He picked up his pencil. He turned the ledger back to face him. "The western fields," he said. "If the gradient is corrected, what's the acreage?" 300 acres of viable farmland. At current prices, that's roughly £600 a year in rental income. Yes, I did the same calculation. He made a note in the margin. "Your father's estate is not as depleted as it looks on paper. The house is over-mortgaged, but the land is good. The management has been poor." "The management has been my father," she said, "who has not looked at a ledger since 1835. "I know that too." She looked at him across the table. The ledger sat between them like a third party to a negotiation. Outside, the house was beginning to wake. She could hear a housemaid on the stairs, the distant clatter of the kitchen. "You haven't answered my question," she said. "Why are you here if the dowry doesn't solve your problem?" He looked at her. He did not look away. "Because I need a partner," he said. "Not a performance." The door opened and Cordelia came in, dressed and composed and already performing, and the Duke closed his ledger and stood, and the morning became what it was supposed to be, and Cecily drank her coffee and said nothing. The third day of the house party was a Wednesday, and it snowed. It snowed seriously, the way it snows in Derbyshire when December decides to make a point, 6 inches by noon and still coming down, the drive invisible, the garden reduced to white shapes where the topiary had been. The Earl's plan for the day had been a scenic walk to the Folly, which was now impossible, so instead he organized a gathering in the Great Hall. Charades, a card game, an informal dance for which the furniture had been pushed back, and Cordelia was pressed into service at the pianoforte again. The Duke danced with Cordelia first. This was correct. Then he danced with Arabella, which was expected. Then he danced with Josephine, who smiled at him with her whole face and angled herself toward the candlelight and was very beautiful, and the Earl watched from the doorway with the expression of a man watching a transaction he expects to go in his favor. Then the Duke crossed the room and asked Cecily to dance. She was sitting in the chair nearest the fire, which was not the chair nearest the dancing, and she was doing the estate arithmetic in a small notebook she kept in her left sleeve. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. Around them, the room went very slightly quiet. Not silent, but quiet, the way a room goes quiet when something unexpected happens and everyone is pretending not to notice. "I don't dance particularly well," she said. "Neither do I." "You danced perfectly well with my sisters." "I danced correctly with your sisters, that's different." She put the notebook in her sleeve and stood up, and he took her hand and they joined the set. And she did not dance particularly well, and he danced correctly but not particularly well either, and they moved through the figures with the slightly grim efficiency of two people completing a task, and it was, objectively, the least romantic dancing in the room. But he talked to her. Not the weather, not the music, not compliments about her gown. He talked about the drainage ditch. He had walked the western boundary that morning in the snow, and he had found the outflow, and he thought she was right about the gradient, and had she considered whether a secondary channel might be more cost-effective than rerouting the primary. She had considered it, she told him so. She told him why she'd rejected it. He argued, she argued back. They completed the entire figure of the dance in disagreement about the secondary channel, and arrived back at the top of the set, having resolved nothing, and both slightly flushed from the argument and not from the dancing. The Earl was no longer watching with satisfaction. He was watching with something more complicated. Josephine was watching with something that looked, quietly, like relief. When the dance ended, the Duke did not release her hand immediately. He held it for one beat longer than courtesy required, and he looked at her and he said quietly, enough that only she could hear, "If I make you an offer, will you hear it?" She looked at him. The room was still doing its pretending. "That depends," she said, "on whether it's an offer or a transaction." "I haven't decided yet," he said. "I think it might be both." He released her hand. She went back to the chair by the fire. She did not take out the notebook. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the fire and felt the room rearranging itself around what had just happened, and she thought, "This is going to cost someone something. It always does." She was right. It cost her the rest of the evening. Her mother found her in the passage outside the Great Hall at 9 o'clock when Cecily had slipped out on the pretense of a headache. Lady Ashworth was not a cruel woman in the way that cruel women are cruel in novels. She did not enjoy the cruelty, did not savor it. She was a drowning woman, and her children were the only things floating nearby, and she grabbed them and pushed down without meaning to, because that is what drowning does. She gripped Cecily's arm above the elbow, which would leave a mark, and she said, in the low, fierce voice she used when she needed not to be heard through walls, "What are you doing?" "I have a headache." "You have nothing of the kind. What did you say to him during that dance?" "We discussed drainage." "You discussed?" Her mother stopped. Her grip tightened. "Cecily, he is here for Cordelia, or Josephine. You know this. The family needs this. Do you understand what I am telling you? The bank has written again. The letter came yesterday. We have until March." March. Cecily had not known about March. She had known the bank was losing patience. She had not known there was a deadline. "How much?" she said. "That is not your concern." "How much, mother?" Her mother looked at her. The grip on her arm did not loosen. 11,000, she said, "by the 1st of March, or the house goes to sale." 11,000. The Earl's dowry was 4,000. The gap was £7,000 in 3 months, And there was no gap like that in the world. There was no bridging it. There was only the Duke and whichever daughter he chose, and the hope that the settlement would be enough to satisfy the bank and keep the house and feed the 12-year-old boy at school and pay the housemaids and buy coal for the fires. Cecily went to her room. She did not have a headache. She sat at her desk and did the arithmetic again, carefully, with a fresh sheet of paper, and the arithmetic came out the same way it always came out, and she looked at it for a long time. Then she packed a trunk. Not all of her things, just the practical ones. The boots, the warm dresses, the notebooks, the agricultural treatises. The things she would need if she went to her aunt in Bath, who had a small house and a smaller income, and had written twice to say that Cecily was welcome if it came to that. It had come to that. She could see that now. She was not Cordelia, and she was not Josephine, and the family needed the Duke to choose one of those two, and the Duke was not going to choose one of those two if she kept sitting in the way, and the cleanest thing and the most useful thing, the thing that helped the most people, was to remove herself from the equation. She folded the dresses. She wrapped the boots. She did not cry. She was 23 years old, and she was tired, and she was very clear-eyed about what she was and what she was not, and she was not the woman a duke chose when he needed £30,000 and an heir. She was the woman who knew about drainage ditches. She latched the trunk and went to bed. The Duke was not in the house at 7 the next morning. Cecily knew this because she went down early, as she always did, and his ledger was not on the breakfast table, and his coffee cup was not there. And when she looked out the window, she could see his footprints in the snow going toward the stables. She thought, he is leaving. She thought, good. She thought, it is the correct outcome. She poured coffee and sat with the packed trunk upstairs and the arithmetic on the table in front of her, and she waited for the sound of carriage wheels on the frozen drive. Instead, at 8:30, the butler came to the breakfast room with a letter on a silver tray. The letter was addressed to her, not to the Earl, not to Lady Ashworth, to Miss Cecily Ashworth, in handwriting that was blunt and clear and slightly impatient-looking, as though the writer had better things to do than form elegant letters. She opened it. It was not a love letter. It was an operational directive. It said, "I have spoken this morning with Mr. Hartley in Sheffield. The debt held against Ashworth House by the London Bank has been purchased. The terms of the new arrangement are attached. The sum is £11,000. I have also engaged a drainage engineer to survey the western fields in the new year. These actions are taken in anticipation of a settlement, the terms of which I would like to discuss with you directly, at your earliest convenience in the library. Not your father, you." Attached was a legal document. She read it twice, she read it a third time. The debt was gone. He had bought it, which meant the bank could not foreclose in March, which meant the house was safe, which meant her mother could stop gripping arms in passages, and her father could stop selling daughters, which meant she folded the letter. She put it in her sleeve next to the notebook. She stood up. She went to the library. He was there. He had his coat on and mud on his boots and the ledger under his arm, and he was standing at the window looking out at the snow-covered drive, and he turned when she came in, and she said, before he could speak, "You bought the debt." "Yes, that's £11,000. I'm aware of the sum. You don't have £11,000. You have £40,000 of obligation and a drainage problem. I sold the London townhouse this morning, by letter. My solicitor has been standing by to execute the sale for 2 weeks. He looked at her steadily. I made the decision the morning after I sat on the floor of the passage with you. I needed to be certain of one thing before I acted. What thing? Whether you would pack a trunk. She went very still. The housekeeper told me, he said. She tells me most things. She is horrified by me and finds me easier to manage if she keeps me informed. He set the ledger down on the desk. You are going to remove yourself, to make it easier for your family, to make it easier for me to choose correctly. It is the correct choice. It is the convenient choice. Those are different things. He came to stand in front of her, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could see the tiredness in his face, and the ink on his thumb, and the place where his cravat had been retied in a hurry. I don't need a performance, I told you that. I need someone who knows the price of things, someone who reads drainage treatises under tables and does the arithmetic before anyone else is awake, and packs a trunk to help her family even when it costs her everything. She looked at him. She looked at the document in her hand. This is still a transaction, she said. Yes. You've bought a debt and a drainage survey and you want a partner in return. Yes. That's... She stopped. She looked at the document again. The terms here. You've settled the debt outright. There's no repayment schedule. You're not holding it over the family. No. Why? Because I need you to choose freely, he said. Not because the alternative is your family losing the house. She looked at him for a long moment. The library was cold. The fire had not been lit yet. It was too early for coal, even with a duke in the house. I have £4,000, she said. That's my dowry. It doesn't solve your problem. No, but you know how to manage an estate and I have a very badly managed one, and together we might actually get the water out of the fields. She almost laughed. She didn't, quite, but almost. May I have until this afternoon, she said. Yes. She went to the door. She stopped. The 4 words, she said. At the end of your letter, you wrote, not your father, you. Why? He looked at her. Because it's your life, not his. She went upstairs and unlatched the trunk. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, she was standing at the top of the Ashworth staircase with her hand in the Duke's arm, and the Earl's 4 daughters and their mother and their father were assembled in the hall below, and the Earl looked like a man who had been told the winning hand and found it was not the hand he'd expected, and Lady Ashworth was gripping her own wrists instead of her daughter's arm, which was an improvement, and Cordelia was standing very straight and very still and looking at her hands, and Josephine was looking at the ceiling, and Arabella was looking at Cecily with an expression that Cecily could not immediately read. The Duke descended the staircase with Cecily beside him, and the hall was very quiet, and at the bottom of the stairs he said to the room, I have spoken with Miss Cecily Ashworth, and she has agreed to my proposal. I have also spoken with Mr. Hartley in Sheffield, and the matter of the bank debt is resolved. The settlement will be drawn up by my solicitor next week. The Earl opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Cecily. Cecily looked back at him. On the sideboard, a crystal glass that had been set too close to the edge vibrated once in the cold air from the open door and fell and shattered on the marble floor, and nobody moved to pick it up. Josephine, very quietly, exhaled, and Arabella, even more quietly, said, Thank God. The wedding was held in February, 6 weeks later, in the village church 2 miles from Ashworth House. It was not a fashionable wedding. There was no London season, no announcement in the Times beyond the legal notice, no hundreds of guests. There were 40 people in the pews, most of them tenants and neighbours, and the Earl's face throughout the ceremony had the expression of a man who has sold a horse at below market value and is trying to decide if he got a good deal after all. Cecily wore her second-best dress, which was a sensible dark green wool, because the church was cold, and the white muslin her mother had proposed would have been impractical, and she was not performing a romance. She wore her good boots. She carried no flowers. It was February, and there were none. The Duke wore his best coat, which was well cut and slightly worn at the cuffs, and he stood at the altar with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is at peace with it, which was, Cecily thought, as good a foundation as any. The vicar read the service. They said the words. He put a plain gold ring on her finger, not the family ring which was entailed, but a new one he had had made in Sheffield, plain and heavy and sized correctly, which meant he had measured her finger at some point without her noticing, which was either attentive or alarming, and she had not yet decided which. Afterward, in the carriage going north to Ravenswood, they sat across from each other in the cold and the silence, and she looked at the ring and he looked at the road, and after about 20 minutes she said, When did you measure my finger? The morning after the dance, he said. You left your gloves on the library table. I traced around the left one. That's alarming. I thought you might think so. It's also efficient. I thought you might think that too. She looked at the ring again. She looked at him. He was looking at the road with the expression he usually wore, which was tired and blunt, and occasionally, when he thought she wasn't watching, something warmer underneath. The townhouse, she said. The London townhouse you sold. Did you need it? I needed it less than I needed the debt gone. That's not the same as not needing it. No. He looked at her. I hadn't been there in 3 years. My father used it for his parliamentary business. I used it for 2 seasons and found London disagreeable and stopped going. He looked back at the road. I won't miss it. She nodded. She folded her hands in her lap. Outside, the Derbyshire landscape moved past in grey and white and the occasional dark stand of trees, and the carriage was cold and the road was rough, and she was a duchess now, which was a fact so strange and large that she was choosing not to look at it directly yet, the way you don't look directly at something very bright. "I should tell you," she said, "that I'm not going to be a conventional duchess." "I know. I am going to manage the estate accounts. I was counting on it. I'm going to argue with you about expenditure. Frequently, I expect. And I am going to continue reading at table when the company is dull." He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. "There is a very good curtain in the library at Ravenswood," he said, "behind the east bookcase. Excellent hiding place." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back out the window. "Good," she said. Ravenswood was larger than she had expected and in worse repair than she had imagined, which was saying something because she had imagined it in poor repair. The north wing had a roof problem. The tenants' cottages on the east side needed rethatching. The kitchen garden was overgrown. The stables were adequate. The library was excellent, large and cold, and full of books that had actually been read, with dog-eared pages and margin notes, and one shelf entirely devoted to agricultural management, which she found in the first hour and stood in front of for a long time. The housekeeper was a woman named Mrs. Crane, who was 60 and had been at Ravenswood for 30 years and had very clear ideas about how a household should be run. She greeted the new Duchess with the formal courtesy of someone who has decided to reserve judgment and is not making any promises. Cecily said, "Mrs. Crane, I would like to see the household accounts for the past 3 years." Mrs. Crane said, "His Grace generally manages the accounts himself." Cecily said, "His Grace has £40,000 of debt and a flooded estate. I would like to see the accounts." Mrs. Crane looked at her for a moment. Then she went and got the accounts. The first night at Ravenswood was the night Cecily had been bracing for since the library in Ashworth House. She had not been naive about what marriage meant, practically speaking. She had 3 sisters and a mother who had been frank about the mechanics in the way that women are frank about mechanics when they want their daughters to go into the arrangement without flinching. She did not flinch, but she was braced. The Duke knocked on the connecting door at 10 o'clock. She was sitting at the small writing desk in the Duchess's bedroom in her nightgown, with the household accounts open. She had found 2 significant discrepancies in the kitchen expenditure, and she was in the middle of a note about them. "Come in," she said. He came in. He was in his shirt sleeves, which she had seen before, and he had a glass of brandy in each hand, which she had not expected. He set one on the desk beside her accounts. He looked at the accounts. "You found the kitchen discrepancy," he said. "Both of them. Mrs. Crane will be appalled. Mrs. Crane will be corrected." She picked up the brandy. "Thank you." He stood there for a moment. He looked at her and then at the connecting door and then at her again, and she could see him deciding something, and she waited. "I want to be plain about something," he said. "You generally are. Nothing in this room happens without your agreement." He said it the way he said everything, flat and direct, without flourish. "I know the law does not require me to say that. I'm saying it anyway." She looked at him. She looked at the brandy in her hand. "May I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Is this how you imagined your wedding night?" He considered the question seriously. "No," he said. "I imagined it considerably more awkward." "And is it?" "Less so." He looked at the accounts. "You found the kitchen discrepancy in under an hour." "There are 2. That is." He stopped, genuinely impressive. She set down the accounts. She set down the brandy. She stood up and she was in her nightgown, and her feet were bare on the cold floor, and she looked at him, and he looked at her, and she said, "I am not braced for tenderness. I was braced for obligation. So if you could be—" "Yes," he said, before she finished the sentence. He reached out and put one hand on her shoulder, just the weight of it, warm through the linen, and he did not move, and he did not speak, and he waited. She put her hand over his. Later, the brandy glasses sat empty on the desk beside the household accounts. The connecting door was left open. The fire had burned low. Outside, the Derbyshire wind came off the moor and hit the north wall of Ravenswood, and the house held. The weeks after the wedding were a compression of work, and the work was the closest thing to happiness Cecily had felt in years. She took the household accounts in the first week and found £700 of annual waste. Not theft, just carelessness. The accumulated cost of a house managed by a man who had been too busy bailing water to notice where the water was coming from. She presented her findings to the Duke at breakfast on a Thursday, 8 days after the wedding, with a written summary and 3 proposed corrections. He read the summary. He turned to the second page. He turned back to the first. "You've restructured the entire provisioning schedule," he said. "The butcher was charging us 14 pence per pound for salted beef. The market rate is 11. We've been paying that premium for 4 years. That's £112 over 4 years. Yes." He put the summary down. He looked at her. "Mrs. Crane agreed to this." Mrs. Crane argued with me for 45 minutes and then agreed that the arithmetic was correct and that the butcher was, in her words, a chancer. She said that? She said several other things too, but that was the most printable. Cecily poured more coffee. She also showed me the linen inventory, which has not been updated since 1829. We have 47 tablecloths and 11 of them are beyond repair. I've written them off. The Duke picked up his pencil. He made a note in the margin of her summary. He handed it back. "What do you need?" he said. "An inkwell on that side of the desk," she said. "I keep having to reach across." He moved the inkwell. He moved it without comment, without ceremony, just picked it up and set it on her side of the desk and went back to his own work, and they sat at the one desk with the 2 chairs and the morning light coming through the frost-edged windows. And it was not romantic, and it was not a fairy tale, and it was, in every way that mattered, exactly what she had needed. The drainage engineer came in the 3rd week and confirmed the gradient problem and proposed a solution that would cost £280 and take 6 weeks in spring. The Duke approved the expenditure. Cecily negotiated the engineer's fee down by £30 and scheduled the work for April, when the ground would be soft enough to dig without the cost of breaking frozen earth. "You reduced his fee," the Duke said, when the engineer had gone. "By 10%. He expected it. They always pad by 10% for the negotiation." "How do you know that?" "My father's land agent taught me. He was the only person in that house who talked to me like I had a brain." She closed the engineer's file. "He was dismissed in 1840 because he told my father the western fields were flooding, and my father didn't want to hear it." The Duke was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be. He taught me first." She stood up and stretched her back, which ached from the desk. "The drainage work will make the western fields viable by autumn. At current rental rates, that's £480 a year in new income. Against 280 spent. Recovered in 8 months, then profit." He looked at her across the desk. He had ink on his thumb as usual, and his sleeves were rolled, and he looked like a man who was doing arithmetic and finding it, for the first time in a long time, coming out in his favor. "Cecily," he said. She looked at him. "Thank you," he said. She sat back down. She picked up the next file. "Don't thank me," she said. "Give me the coal account. I think there's another chancer in there." There was. He was a supplier from Derby who had been overcharging by 8% for 3 years. Cecily wrote him a letter that was 6 sentences long and entirely without warmth, and the supplier wrote back with an apology and a corrected invoice, and Mrs. Crane read the corrected invoice and said to no one in particular that the new Duchess had a head for business, which from Mrs. Crane was approximately equivalent to a papal endorsement. The argument about the carriage happened in the 5th week. It was a proper argument, the kind with raised voices and a door closed firmly, and the kitchen staff going very quiet on the other side of it, and it was about whether to repair the estate carriage or replace it, and Cecily's position was that the repair was a false economy because the undercarriage was cracked and would crack again within 18 months, and the Duke's position was that they did not have the capital for a replacement at present. And Cecily's position was that she had found the capital in the coal account correction and the butcher renegotiation and 3 other adjustments she had made in the past month, and she had the figures here, and would he like to see them? He looked at the figures. He looked at her. "You've been saving toward the carriage," he said. "I've been saving toward several things. The carriage is the most urgent." "When did you?" The second week, I could see the undercarriage from the stable yard. It was obvious. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the figures again. He set them down. Order the carriage, he said. I already have, she said. I wanted to tell you before the invoice arrived. He looked at her with an expression she was learning to read, which was the expression he wore when she had done something that surprised him, which happened less often now than it had in the beginning but still happened, and she thought she might like it to keep happening, the surprise, the small recalibration. You're infuriating, he said. You're welcome, she said. He laughed. It was a short laugh, the kind that escapes before a person decides to let it, and it changed his face entirely, and she filed that away too. The enemy came in March. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a very good carriage with a very cold expression and the bearing of a woman who has never been told no and does not intend to start hearing it now. She was the Duke's aunt, Lady Harwick, and she had a claim on Ravenswood that predated the current Duke, a jointure arrangement made by the previous Duke, the one who had dug the drainage ditch at the wrong angle, that entitled Lady Harwick to the use of the south wing and a quarterly income of £300, and she had not been using the south wing because she had been living in Bath, but now she had decided to use it, and she had not written ahead, and she arrived at Ravenswood at 4 in the afternoon and asked for the housekeeper, and was shown instead to the library where Cecily was working. Lady Harwick looked at Cecily. Cecily looked at Lady Harwick. You're the new Duchess, Lady Harwick said. Yes, you're very young. I'm 23. You're very ordinary. She said it the way a person says a thing they believe to be devastating. I had expected someone more. Decorative? Cecily set down her pen. I'm afraid not. Please sit down, Lady Harwick. I'll have tea brought. Lady Harwick sat. She looked around the library with the expression of someone reasserting ownership. I shall be using the south wing, she said. I trust it has been kept in order. The south wing has a roof problem, Cecily said. We are having it repaired in April. Until then it is not habitable. I am sure I have endured worse. You will endure damp plaster and a bucket in the corner of the bedroom. I don't recommend it. Cecily poured tea without waiting for the housemaid. Lady Harwick, I have read the jointure arrangement. You are entitled to the south wing and £300 quarterly. The £300 has been paid without interruption. The south wing will be available in May, when the repairs are complete. Until then, I can offer you the guest rooms in the west corridor. That is not what the arrangement. The arrangement does not specify that the south wing must be habitable, only that it is yours. Cecily set the teacup in front of her. I am offering you something better than the arrangement. You may refuse it if you prefer the bucket. Lady Harwick looked at her for a long moment. You are very direct for a duchess, she said. I am very direct for anyone, Cecily said. It saves time. My nephew, Lady Harwick said, and her voice shifted, became something with edges, did not consult me before this marriage. I had understood he was to make a different choice. He made the choice he made. He was expected to choose a woman with a substantial dowry. The estate requires— I am aware of what the estate requires, Cecily said. I manage the estate accounts. I can show you the current position if you would like to see it. I am not interested in— We have reduced annual expenditure by £940 since January. The western drainage work will generate £480 in new rental income beginning in autumn. The outstanding debt has been reduced by £11,000 through the sale of the London townhouse. The current trajectory has the estate solvent within 7 years. She picked up her own tea. I have the figures here if you would like to check my arithmetic. Lady Harwick was quiet. My nephew, she said more carefully, is fortunate in his choice. Yes, Cecily said, he is. The door opened, and the Duke came in. He was muddy from the fields, and he had his coat over his arm, and he stopped in the doorway and looked at his aunt, and then at Cecily, and then at the tea service, and then at his aunt again. Aunt Harwick, he said, I didn't know you were coming. Evidently, Lady Harwick said. She looked at Cecily. She looked at the Duke. She looked at the figures on the desk that Cecily had not put away. Your wife, she said to the Duke, has been explaining the estate accounts to me. Has she? He came into the room and stood beside Cecily's chair, not in front of it, beside it, and he did not speak to Lady Harwick with any particular deference. And I find them satisfactory," Lady Harwick said, as though this cost her something. "I will take the West Corridor rooms until May." "Good," the Duke said. "I'll have Mrs. Crane prepare them." Lady Harwick stood, smoothed her skirts, and looked at Cecily with an expression that was not warmth, but was something adjacent to respect, which was, Cecily thought, as much as she was likely to get, and more than she had expected. "You will do," Lady Harwick said. She left. The door closed behind her. Cecily looked at the Duke. He was looking at the closed door. "She came to reassert ownership," he said. "Yes, and you showed her the accounts. It seemed more efficient than a confrontation." He looked at her. He had mud on his boots and his sleeves were still rolled from whatever he had been doing in the fields, and he looked tired and present and entirely himself. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes." She picked up her pen. "She's going to write to her friends in Bath about the estate accounts. I'd like to make sure the figures are current before she does." He laughed again, the same short, escaped laugh. He put his hand on her shoulder, just the weight of it, the same as the first night, warm and still, and she reached up and put her hand over his without looking up from the figures, and they stayed like that for a moment, her hand over his, the accounts open between them, the fire burning properly now because it was March and the coal supplier had been sorted. The adrenaline of Lady Harwick's visit drained slowly, the way coal drains out of a room when a fire is finally lit. By evening, Cecily's hands were steadier than they'd been at 4 o'clock, but she was tired in the specific way that comes after a long defense when the walls hold, but the holding costs something. She was in the library after dinner, the household accounts closed, sitting with her feet tucked under her in the chair by the fire, not reading, just sitting, when the Duke came in with 2 glasses of brandy and sat in the chair across from her and held one out. She took it. They sat in the firelight and the quiet. "She would have come regardless," he said. "She has been waiting to see what kind of woman I married. She needed to know if she still had leverage." "Does she?" "No." He looked at his glass. "She hasn't had leverage since January. Since the morning I sat on the floor of the passage with you and decided to sell the townhouse." He looked at her. "I want to tell you something." "You can." "I did not know in January that I was going to fall in love with you. I knew I needed a partner. I knew you were the only person in that house who saw the machinery for what it was. I knew the drainage problem and the ledger and the fact that you were going to remove yourself to Bath to make it easier for everyone else." He turned the glass in his hands. "I thought I was making a practical decision." She looked at him. The fire crackled. Outside, the March wind came off the moor. "And now," she said, "now I know the difference between a practical decision and a catastrophically important one." He set the glass down. "I should have said this before Lady Harwick arrived and made it necessary. I'm saying it now." She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the fire. She looked at her hands. "I packed a trunk," she said, "to make it easier for you to choose correctly. I know. And you bought a debt and sold a house and came to me with a document and said, 'Not your father, you.'" "Yes, that was." She stopped. She looked at him. "I was not prepared for someone to choose me on purpose." "Get used to it," he said. "I intend to keep doing it." She set her glass down. She stood up. He stood up because she stood up, the same reflex he'd had since Ashworth House, and she crossed the small distance between the chairs, and she put her hand on his face, and he put his hands on her waist, and she kissed him, or he kissed her, or they collided, which was the more accurate word, collided the way 2 people collide when they have been moving toward each other for 2 months and have been too busy bailing water to notice. It was heat and grip and the taste of brandy and his hands pulling her closer, and hers in his hair. And the word she said against his mouth was not poetic and not fluent, and was exactly 1 syllable. "Ours," she said. "Ours," he said back. The fire burned low. The wind hit the north wall and the house held, as it had been holding for 140 years, as it would hold now that someone was finally managing it properly. 9 months later, on a December morning, exactly 1 year after the Duke's carriage had come up the Ashworth Drive in the snow, Cecily was at the library desk at Ravenswood with the estate accounts open and ink on her chin and her feet in thick wool stockings, because the library was cold in December and she had learned to dress for the room rather than the expectation. The drainage work had been completed in April. The western fields had been let to 2 new tenants in May. The first rental income had come in September, £460, which was £20 under projection because one of the tenants had needed a rent abatement for a difficult harvest, which Cecily had granted without consulting the Duke because it was the right thing to do, and she had the authority, and she knew it. The Duke had found out about the abatement from Mrs. Crane, who had told him in the tone of someone reporting a minor catastrophe. He had come to the library and said, "You granted the Holloways a rent abatement." She had said, "Their harvest was poor. They couldn't pay. You didn't ask me." No. He had looked at her. He had picked up the ledger. He had looked at the figures. £20, he said. Yes. Against 440 received. Yes. And the Holloways will be able to pay in full next quarter. Almost certainly. It was a weather problem, not a management problem. He had set the ledger down. "I would have done the same thing," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I didn't ask." He had looked at her for a moment with the expression she had catalogued over 9 months, the one that was surprised and recalibrated, and something warmer underneath. And then he had gone back to his own work, and she had gone back to hers, and that was that. The coal account was now fully corrected. The butcher charged 11 pence per pound. The carriage was new. The south wing roof was repaired, and Lady Harwick had taken up residence in October, and had been, if not warm, then at least not hostile, and had told 3 of her friends in Bath that the new Duchess of Ravenswood had a remarkable head for figures, which had the effect of making the Duke rather more socially interesting than he had been in years. The outstanding debt stood at £26,000, down from 40. In 7 years, if the trajectory held, it would be gone. The Duke came into the library at 9:30, muddy from the fields, with his coat over his arm and a letter in his hand. He set the letter on the desk beside the accounts. He looked at the ink on her chin. He did not mention it. "Letter from your father," he said. "What does he want?" "The roof on the east wing. He's asking if we can extend a loan." She looked at the letter. She looked at the accounts. She did the arithmetic in approximately 4 seconds. "No," she said. "I thought you might say that. We can offer him a surveyor. The east wing roof may not need full replacement. It may just need the flashing repaired. If he replaces the whole roof when only the flashing is the problem, he'll spend 3 times what's necessary. You want to help him spend less money. I want him to stop spending money he doesn't have on problems he hasn't correctly diagnosed." She picked up her pen. "I'll write to him. I know a good surveyor." The Duke sat down in his chair across the desk. He poured coffee from the pot that had been sitting there since 8 o'clock and was now lukewarm, which he did not seem to mind. He opened his own ledger. They worked in the quiet. The fire was adequate. Outside, the December sky was the inside of a pewter bowl, as it had been a year ago, as it would be next year, as it was every December in Derbyshire. After a while, the Duke said, without looking up, "Is there room?" She looked at him. He was looking at his ledger. The corner of his mouth was doing the thing it did. She looked at the chair beside her, the second chair, the one that had been pulled up to her side of the desk since February. "It's a very large desk," she said. "You'll manage." He moved his chair to her side. He set his ledger next to her accounts. He put his coffee on the corner. He picked up his pencil. They worked. The greatest love stories are not on the dance floor. They are behind the curtain, over the ledger, in the mud, in the cold, in the argument about the carriage and the coal and the roof. They are built by 2 people who see the machinery for what it is and choose each other anyway, not despite the transaction but through it and out the other side. Cecily and James Ravenswood tore down £40,000 of inherited debt and a lifetime of being told what they were worth and built something that lasted. If that is the kind of story you want more of, raw, cynical, deeply real and warmer than it has any right to be, like this video, share it with someone who knows the price of things, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Tell me in the comments, are you a ballroom person or a curtain person? I already know which one you are.